My name, as I said, was Paul Hellyer. I'm a former Minister of National Defence for Canada. I served in 3 governments during a total of 23.5 years as a Member of Parliament. Although as Minister of National Defence, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. He sent me a copy of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. And so after confirming the contents of the book with a retired United States Air Force general, I accept the invitation of Victor Vigiani, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort, Mike Bird, to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. Since then, I've learned a lot from many sources, including a number of the fantastic witnesses that we have heard these last 4 days. They were so outstanding, I was just really blown away with them, the amount of information that was available. And I appreciate every single one of them. But because I'm not a ufologist, I'm a politician, there are only a few things that I want to add in that particular realm. First is that about in the 1960s sometime, there was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I have brought my latest book called Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, as an aide-memoire, and I name 5 different species here. I'm aware of more now. As a matter of fact, I saw a document just a few days ago that mentioned 20. And I think you, Mr. Chairman, were interested in some of the places they might come from. And I have in here Zeta Reticuli, R-E-T-I-C-U-L-I, Reticuli, the Pleiades, Orion, Andromeda, and the Altair star systems. So I don't think we can more refer to them as they because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers. And I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin, but after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with them. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality. There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that Millennial Hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and it's a very interesting read if you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into these people floating across the terrain in the desert. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling, but that could be a necessary step in our survival.